Daniel Wright stood at the center of the enormous chamber, feeling very small. Above him, the curved walls rose hundreds of feet, filled with platforms where representatives from over 300 alien species watched him. Some looked almost human, with 2 arms and 2 legs. Others had many limbs, or no limbs at all. Some floated in special tanks filled with strange liquids. All of them were now staring at the human. The 5 main council members sat at a high table directly in front of him. They were the oldest and most powerful species in the galaxy. The Vesperi representative, who looked like a giant praying mantis with blue, shiny skin, clicked his mouthparts together in what Daniel knew was a sign of boredom. "Human Representative Wright," said the Arcturian counselor, a tall being with purple skin and 4 arms. "You have been called here to explain the recent actions of your ships near Vesperi space. We expect you to offer proper apologies for these intrusions." Daniel took a deep breath. He had practiced this moment for days, but still felt his heart beating fast. Behind him, 20 steps away, stood his assistant Lisa Novak. She gave him a small nod. It was time. "Honored members of the Galactic Council," Daniel began, his voice steady despite his fear. "I stand before you today not to offer apologies." A murmur spread through the chamber. This was not what they expected. Instead, Daniel continued, raising his voice. "On behalf of the United Earth Government, I must inform you that we are formally declaring war against the Vesperi Dominion." The chamber erupted in noise. Some representatives jumped to their feet. Others made high whistling sounds or flashed colors across their bodies in shock. The Vesperi counselor's body turned from blue to an angry red. The head counselor, an ancient being that looked like a giant jellyfish, slammed a tentacle down on the table. Silence. The noise slowly died down. The jellyfish turned its eye stalks toward Daniel. "Human, do you understand what you are saying? Your species has been part of this council for less than 30 years. The Vesperi have been members for over 10,000 years. They have 100 worlds to your 3 colonies. Their ships outnumber yours 1,000 to 1. Daniel nodded. "We understand the situation perfectly." The Vesperi counselor rose to his full 12-foot height. "This is madness, or a joke. Humans cannot possibly believe they can challenge us militarily. Your species is still primitive, barely able to reach your own star system's edge." "Nevertheless," Daniel said calmly, "our declaration stands. As per council rules, we request an emergency session in 48 hours where we will present our reasons and evidence." "This is an outrage." The Vesperi's voice was like scraping metal. "I demand the human be removed and sanctioned." The head counselor waved a tentacle. "Under our laws, they have the right to make their case, no matter how foolish. Emergency session is granted." Then, looking directly at Daniel with 3 eyes, the counselor added, "Human representative, I hope you understand that if your evidence is not convincing, Earth will face serious consequences for this disruption." Daniel bowed slightly. "We understand, honored counselor. Earth is prepared for all outcomes." Guards came to escort Daniel from the chamber. As he walked toward the exit, the sound of hundreds of species talking all at once filled his ears. At the door, Lisa Novak waited for him, her face tight with worry. "It's done," he whispered as they walked together down the long hallway. "Now we see if they take the bait." Lisa looked at him. "And if they don't?" Daniel's face grew serious. "Then we've just made the biggest mistake in human history. But if we're right about what the Vesperi have been doing." He didn't finish the sentence. Behind them, the council chamber was still in chaos. The first move had been made. In 48 hours, they would reveal the truth that would change the galaxy forever. 3 weeks earlier, Captain Eric Johnson stood on the bridge of the Earth fleet vessel Perseverance. His ship was hiding behind a small moon in what was supposed to be empty, neutral space. But it wasn't empty at all. "Are you sure our scanners are working right?" Eric asked his science officer, Jane Miller. Jane nodded, her eyes not leaving her screen. "Yes, Captain. That's definitely a Vesperi outpost. And it's not on any official maps." Eric frowned. The bug-like Vesperi were one of the oldest and most powerful species in the Galactic Council. They weren't supposed to have secret bases in neutral territory. Any idea what they're doing out here? Not yet, Jane said. But I'm picking up strange energy readings, and there are ships coming and going at odd times. Eric made a decision. We need to get closer. Lieutenant Ford, take us in slowly. Keep us behind the moon as long as possible. 24 hours later, Eric and his team discovered something that would change everything. They had managed to hack into the Vesperi computer systems and download data before escaping undetected. This can't be right, Jane said as they looked at the translated files in Eric's office. Her face had gone pale. Eric felt sick as he looked at the evidence. The files showed that the Vesperi had been secretly taking people from Earth and other developing worlds for experiments. They had pictures of humans in cages, reports of tests, and lists of thousands of missing people going back 50 years. We need to get this to Earth now, Eric said. Back on Earth, in a secure room deep under the White House, Defense Secretary Catherine Morgan showed the evidence to President Samuel Martinez. Large screens around the room displayed horrible images of humans and other aliens being held in Vesperi labs. They've been doing this for decades, Catherine said quietly, taking people from remote areas where they wouldn't be missed. Hikers, small villages, people at sea. The Vesperi see us as nothing but lab animals. President Martinez's face showed his anger. We need to bring this to the Galactic Council immediately. Catherine shook her head. That's the problem, sir. The Council would never take our word over the Vesperi. They're founding members with thousands of years of history. We're newcomers who've barely been in space for a century. So what do? We can't let this continue. Catherine took a deep breath. I've been talking with Ambassador Wright. We have an idea, but it's risky. Council rules say that in case of a formal war declaration, both sides must be given equal time to present evidence at an emergency session. Martinez looked surprised. You want us to declare war against a species that could wipe us out easily? It's the only way to force the Council to listen to us, Catherine explained. The Vesperi are protected by their status unless we trigger the emergency protocols. We don't actually plan to fight a war we can't win. Unless we have to, the president said grimly. 2 days later, Ambassador Daniel Wright received his orders while on his diplomatic ship heading to the Council homeworld. His assistant, Lisa Novak, watched his face as he read them. They want us to declare war, she asked, shocked. Daniel nodded slowly. It's the only way to make sure all Council species hear the truth at once. If we go through normal channels, the Vesperi will block us every step of the way. But sir, if this goes wrong, Earth becomes a target, Daniel finished for her. But if we do nothing, the Vesperi keep taking our people for their labs. He stared out at the stars through the view screen. Sometimes you have to risk everything to do what's right. Lisa looked worried, but nodded. I understand. When do we make the declaration? As soon as we arrive, Daniel said. The Vesperi have called us to answer for some border incidents. They expect us to apologize. His lips formed a grim smile. They're going to be very surprised. The emergency session of the Galactic Council began exactly 48 hours after Daniel Wright's declaration of war. The huge chamber was even more crowded than before. Many species that usually sent junior representatives had sent their leaders instead. Everyone wanted to see the humans who had dared to challenge the mighty Vesperi. Daniel stood with Lisa and their small team at the entrance to the chamber. They had spent the last 2 days preparing their evidence and checking their presentation systems. Are we ready? Daniel asked quietly. Lisa nodded. All the files are prepared. The translation software is working perfectly. And she paused, checking a small device in her hand. Commander Martinez reports her team is in position for the live feed. Then let's make history, Daniel said. They entered the chamber together. The noise of hundreds of conversations died down as they walked to the center. The 5 main council members watched from their high table. The Vesperi counselor's skin had turned a deep, angry red. The head counselor, the jellyfish-like being, spoke first. This emergency session will now begin. Human Representative Wright has declared war on the Vesperi Dominion. Both sides will present their cases. The humans will speak first. Daniel stepped forward. He took a small device from his pocket and activated it. A large hologram appeared in the air above him, showing images of Earth and humans going about their daily lives. Honored council members, Daniel began. I know many of you think humans are young, foolish, and too quick to anger. You may be right about some of that. But today, we bring you evidence of a crime so terrible that we had no choice but to use the most extreme measure available to us. He tapped the device again. The hologram changed to show the secret Vesperi facility that Captain Johnson had discovered. Then it showed the data they had stolen. Images of humans and other aliens in cages, being cut open, being tested on. A gasp went through the chamber. Some representatives turned away from the images. Others leaned forward, eyes wide with shock or disbelief. For at least 50 years, Daniel continued, the Vesperi have been secretly taking beings from Earth and other developing worlds. They have performed cruel experiments on thousands of innocent people, people who vanished without a trace, whose families never knew what happened to them. The Vesperi counselor stood up. This is a lie. These images are fake. The humans have created this story to gain sympathy from the council. Senior Counselor Ilarovix of the Phrygian Confederation, a tall being with silver skin, raised a hand for silence. These are serious accusations, Ambassador Wright. Do you have proof beyond these images, which could indeed be falsified? Daniel nodded. We do. He looked at Lisa, who pressed a button on her own device. A new hologram appeared, showing a real-time video feed. It showed human soldiers in spacesuits breaking into what was clearly another Vesperi facility. The camera followed them as they moved through the building, breaking open locked doors. Behind those doors were cages filled with beings from many different species. Some looked barely alive. Others pressed against the bars, eyes wide with hope as they saw their rescuers. The camera zoomed in on a woman leading the rescue team. Commander Olivia Martinez removed her helmet and spoke directly to the council. This is Commander Martinez of Earth Special Forces. We are currently liberating a secret Vesperi research facility on Moon LV-426 in the Tartarus system. We have found prisoners from 12 different species here, including 43 humans. Many are children. The chamber erupted in shock and outrage. The Vesperi counselor was now shouting, his translator barely keeping up with his angry clicks and hisses. Daniel raised his voice to be heard over the noise. We did not declare war because we believe we can defeat the Vesperi militarily. We declared war because your protocols gave us no other option to be heard. The council chamber took a short break after the humans' shocking presentation. When they returned, the mood had changed. Many representatives who had looked at the humans with scorn now watched them with interest or even respect. Others still seemed doubtful, whispering among themselves. Far from the council chambers, Dr. Alan Foster worked in a small lab aboard the human diplomatic vessel Endeavor. He was tall and thin, with glasses that kept sliding down his nose as he bent over his equipment. Next to him stood a Vesperi who looked very different from the angry counselor. This Vesperi was smaller, with lighter blue skin, and seemed nervous. Are you sure this will work, Nixtal? Alan asked the Vesperi. Nixtal's mouthparts clicked softly. Yes, Dr. Foster. This genetic test will prove that the prisoners you rescued have been altered by Vesperi science. Each experiment leaves a special mark that only our scientists know about. Ellen looked at Nixtal with wonder. The Vesperi scientist had taken an enormous risk by helping the humans. Why did you decide to help us? Your people will call you a traitor. Nixtal's large eyes seemed sad. I was born into the science caste. I was taught that knowledge should help all beings, not hurt them. What my leaders were doing was wrong. And the Vesperi paused. Your people were not the only victims. The High Command planned to increase the program. Soon many more species would suffer. Alan nodded and turned back to his work. They needed to finish these tests before the council session ended. Meanwhile, in the corridors outside the main chamber, Ambassador Wright was surprised when a group of aliens approached him. He recognized them as representatives from the Solarian League and the Proxima Coalition, civilizations that, like humanity, were relatively new to the galactic community. Ambassador Wright said Jexnar of the Solarians, a being that looked like a tall human but with golden skin and 4 small horns. Your presentation was unexpected but effective. Thank you, Daniel said carefully, not sure what the Solarian wanted. Our intelligence services have noticed similar disappearances among our people, Jexnar continued, lowering his voice. But we had no proof, and no way to make the council listen. The Proxima representative, a short, furry being with 6 arms, nodded in agreement. You humans found a clever way to use the council's own rules. We wish to stand with Earth in this matter. Daniel felt a rush of relief. Earth had come to the council expecting to stand alone. Your support means a great deal to us, he said sincerely. By the time Daniel returned to the chamber for the afternoon session, 7 more civilizations had privately pledged their support to Earth. Most surprising was a message from the Aldebarans, one of the oldest and usually most neutral species in the galaxy. The time for silence has passed. The Aldebaran's message said simply, "We stand with Earth." The Vesperi were now given their chance to respond. Ambassador Thizkar, a tall insectoid with a shiny green-blue shell, took the center of the chamber. These accusations are nothing but lies, Thizkar said, his voice translated into a harsh metallic sound. The humans have created false evidence to gain political advantage. The facility they attacked was a legitimate medical research center. The so-called prisoners were patients receiving treatment. Many council members shifted uncomfortably. The Vesperi's denial seemed weak after the powerful images the humans had shown. Lisa leaned close to Daniel and whispered, "Dr. Foster just sent a message. The tests are complete. They have proof that the prisoner's DNA was altered using specific Vesperi methods." Daniel nodded slightly. The tide was turning in their favor, but he knew the Vesperi would not give up easily. They were ancient and powerful, with many secrets and allies throughout the galaxy. The real fight was just beginning. While the council debated on the distant galactic hub, the Vesperi decided to send a message to humanity. A fleet of 20 Vesperi warships jumped into space near Jupiter, heading straight for the human colony on Ganymede. Commander Paul Hudson was eating dinner when the alarm sounded throughout the Jupiter defense station. He dropped his fork and ran to the command center, still chewing his last bite. "Report," he shouted as he entered the room. His second-in-command, Susan Rivera, looked up from her screen with a worried face. "Vesperi ships, sir. At least 20. They came out of nowhere. They're heading for Ganymede." Paul felt his stomach tighten. Ganymede was home to over 50,000 people, mostly families of miners and scientists. The Jupiter Defense Fleet had only 7 ships. "Send an emergency message to Earth. Tell them we're under attack," Paul ordered. "Then get all ships to form a defense line between the Vesperi and Habitat Cluster 4. That's where most of the families are." The next hour was chaos. The human ships were much smaller than the Vesperi vessels, and their weapons were weaker. But Paul had studied old naval battles from Earth's history. He knew that sometimes a smaller force could win if they were smart and brave. "Stay in tight formation," he told his captains. "Target the same enemy ship together, and watch for their flanking moves." From his flagship Defiance, Paul watched as the Vesperi ships approached. They were beautiful in a scary way, with their curved, shiny hulls that looked like insect shells. But he had no time to admire them. "They're firing on Habitat 7. Susan shouted. Paul gripped the arms of his command chair. Habitat 7 was a civilian science station. All ships moved to protect Habitat 7. Fire at will. The battle was brutal. The human ships managed to destroy 2 Vesperi vessels, but they paid a heavy price. 3 human ships were completely destroyed. Paul's own ship, Defiance, took a direct hit to its main engine. "We're losing power," Susan reported, her voice steady despite the fear Paul could see in her eyes. "Life support is down to 40%. Paul made a hard decision. "Pull back to Habitat Cluster 4. We make our stand there." The remaining human ships formed a last line of defense around the main civilian habitats. The Vesperi ships approached slowly, as if enjoying the moment. Paul prepared to give the order for a last desperate attack. Then suddenly, the Vesperi ships stopped firing. Their formation changed, pulling back slightly. "Sir," Susan said, confused. "They're sending a message." A hologram appeared on the bridge. A Vesperi commander, his insect-like face cold and alien, spoke in perfect English. "This is merely a taste of what awaits humanity's children. Tell your leaders that their lies at the council will have consequences." Then, as quickly as they had come, the Vesperi ships turned and jumped away, leaving behind the damaged human fleet and several destroyed habitats. "Get me casualty reports," Paul ordered, his voice rough with emotion. The numbers were bad. 317 dead, over 1,000 injured, 2 habitats completely destroyed. But it could have been much worse. If the Vesperi had really wanted to, they could have wiped out the entire colony. As the rescue ships began their work, Paul realized something important. They didn't want to destroy us completely, he told Susan. They wanted to leave witnesses. They wanted us to spread the word of what happened here. Susan nodded slowly. "It's a warning." "Yes," Paul agreed. "But they made a mistake. They thought this would scare us into backing down." He looked at the damaged stations, where people were already working to save lives and repair the damage. "They don't understand humans very well." Back at the Galactic Council, news of the attack spread quickly. Instead of frightening the other species, the Vesperi's brutal attack on civilian targets only made more of them support Earth. The images of damaged habitats and injured children turned the tide of opinion firmly against the Vesperi. It was the 5th day of the emergency session. The Galactic Council had never moved so quickly in its 5,000-year history. News of the Vesperi attack on Ganymede had reached the Council only hours after it happened. The images of injured human children and destroyed homes had shocked many species who had previously been neutral. The Great Chamber was completely silent as High Judge Omex II entered. Omex II belonged to an ancient race that looked like tall, thin humans with golden skin and 6 fingers on each hand. The High Judge was over 700 years old and rarely spoke at council meetings. When Omex II did speak, everyone listened. Daniel and Lisa sat with their team, waiting nervously. The last 5 days had been exhausting. They had presented all their evidence. Dr. Foster and Nick Stahl had proved that the prisoner's DNA had been changed using secret Vesperi methods. And the Vesperi had made things worse for themselves by attacking Ganymede. Omex II raised both 6-fingered hands, and the chamber grew even quieter. The evidence presented by Earth's representatives, supported by multiple independent investigations, confirms that the Vesperi Dominion has violated our most sacred laws regarding the treatment of sentient beings. A low murmur spread through the chamber. The Vesperi representatives buzzed angrily, their shells turning dark colors to show their rage. Furthermore, Omex II continued, the unprovoked attack on a civilian colony during an ongoing council investigation is an unacceptable violation of our peace codes. The High Judge paused, looking slowly around the huge room. The council will now vote on 2 measures. First, whether to strip the Vesperi Dominion of their founding member status. Second, whether to authorize a multi-species peacekeeping force to secure all known Vesperi research facilities. The voting took less than an hour. The results appeared on large screens around the chamber. Both measures had passed by large majorities. Daniel felt a mix of relief and worry. They had won the political fight, but the Vesperi were not going to accept these punishments easily. They controlled too many worlds, too many resources, to surrender without a real war. As the session ended, Daniel and his team headed back to their quarters. They needed rest before planning their next steps. That evening, as Daniel sat alone in his room, looking at reports from Earth, there was a soft knock at his door. When he opened it, he was surprised to see Counselor Zixton of the Arcturian Collective standing there. Zixton had been one of the loudest critics of humanity when Daniel first made his war declaration. "May I enter, Ambassador Wright?" the tall, purple-skinned alien asked politely. Daniel nodded, stepping aside to let the Arcturian in. "What can I do for you, Counselor?" Zixton studied Daniel with all four of his eyes. "Your strategy was brilliantly primitive, Ambassador. No established race would have dared such a provocative move. Perhaps that is why the Vesperi underestimated you." Daniel wasn't sure if he was being complimented or insulted. Sometimes being newcomers gives us clarity that tradition obscures. The Arcturian made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Indeed, I came to warn you, human. The Council's vote today is not the end. It is just the beginning." "We know," Daniel said. "The Vesperi will not accept these sanctions peacefully." "No, they will not," Zixton agreed. "But you should know that you are not alone. Many species have suffered from Vesperi experiments. We were simply too afraid or too politically careful to challenge them." The Arcturian moved toward the door, then paused. "The Arcturian Collective will contribute ships to the peacekeeping force." And he hesitated. "We have certain technologies that might help your defenses at Earth and your colonies. I will send the details tomorrow." After Zixton left, Daniel sat down heavily in his chair. Earth had won a great victory today. But he knew that the real war was just beginning. The Vesperi would strike back, harder next time. And despite new allies and helpful technologies, humanity was still facing one of the most powerful species in the galaxy. Daniel looked out at the stars visible through his window and whispered, "I hope we're ready for what comes next." While Earth celebrated its victory at the Galactic Council, the Vesperi were planning their revenge. 3 days after the Council's vote, a massive Vesperi battle fleet appeared near Neptune. It was much larger than anyone had expected, over 100 warships, each one bigger and more powerful than anything humans had built. Admiral Nicole Harrison stood on the bridge of her ship, the Resolute, looking at the display showing the Vesperi fleet. She was a tall woman with short gray hair and a face that rarely showed fear. But now, seeing the size of the enemy force, she felt a cold knot in her stomach. "That's a lot of ships," said her tactical officer, Frank Miller. Nicole nodded. "Much more than our intelligence suggested they would send." She tapped her communication panel. "All ships, this is Admiral Harrison. Form defensive formation Delta. Our job is to buy time for the civilian evacuations." Earth's fleet of 35 ships looked small compared to the Vesperi Armada. The human ships were newer and their crews were well-trained, but their technology was generations behind the Vesperi. Nicole had studied old naval battles from Earth's history. She knew that sometimes a smaller force could win against a larger one by being smarter and more flexible. "Use Neptune's rings for cover," she ordered. "Create the drone formations we practiced. And remember, concentrate fire on their command ships." The battle began an hour later. The Vesperi ships moved forward in perfect formation, their energy weapons lighting up space with bright purple beams. The human fleet split into smaller groups, using Neptune's rings to hide and then attack from unexpected angles. Hours passed. The bridge of the Resolute was filled with smoke from damaged systems. Nicole wiped sweat from her face as she studied the battle displays. They had destroyed 24 Vesperi ships, but had lost 12 of their own. "Admiral," called Frank from his station. "The civilian ships from Triton Colony report they're clear of the battle zone. All non-military personnel are away." Nicole allowed herself a small smile. That was their main goal, to protect the civilians. "Good work. Now let's see if we can bloody these bugs a bit more before we withdraw." After 18 hours of fighting, Earth's fleet was down to just 10 operational ships. Nickel knew they couldn't hold out much longer. But they had done better than anyone expected, destroying nearly 40% of the Vesperi force. All ships prepare for emergency jump to Earth defensive position, Nickel ordered. They would make one last stand at Earth itself. Then something unexpected happened. The space at the edge of the battle suddenly twisted and rippled. New ships appeared, dozens of them, but they weren't Vesperi. Nickel recognized the curved designs of Aldebaran's vessels, the angular shapes of Solarian warships, and several other species ships. "This is Admiral Ket Lomer of the Combined Council Fleet," announced a new voice on all channels. "By authority of the Galactic Council, we order all Vesperi forces to stand down immediately." Nickel felt a wave of relief wash over her. The Council had sent help, and just in time. The Vesperi commander's angry face appeared on the main screen. "This conflict is between the Vesperi Dominion and the humans. The Council has no right to interfere." Admiral Ket Lomer, a tall Solarian with golden skin, responded calmly. The Council voted. "Your status as a founding member has been suspended. Your attack on Council-protected species is illegal. Stand down now or face the combined firepower of 7 races." For several tense minutes, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the Vesperi ships began to power down their weapons. Nickel slumped in her chair, suddenly aware of how exhausted she was. They had survived. More than that, they had fought the mighty Vesperi to a standstill before help arrived. Earth had proven itself a worthy member of the galactic community. As medical teams treated the wounded and repair crews began their work, Nickel looked out at the stars. Things would never be the same for humanity. They had entered a larger, more dangerous universe, but they had also shown that humans could not be pushed around, even by the oldest and most powerful species in the galaxy. 1 year later, Ambassador Daniel Wright stood once more before the Galactic Council. The chamber looked different now. Several races that had never sent representatives before were present. The Vesperi section was smaller, and their representatives were quieter, their shells a dull blue instead of the bright colors they used to display. Daniel himself had changed too. His hair had more gray, and there were new lines on his face. The last year had been hard, but also full of amazing progress for humanity. The head counselor, the jellyfish-like being, floated forward. "Ambassador Wright, please step forward." Daniel walked to the center of the chamber, where he had stood a year ago to make his shocking declaration of war. Lissa Novak stood nearby, watching proudly. "The council has voted," the head counselor announced. "Earth is granted probationary council membership, effective immediately." A murmur ran through the chamber. Probationary membership was a huge honor, especially for a species that had only been spacefaring for about a century. Usually, a race had to wait 500 years or more for such status. Daniel bowed his head. "Earth is honored by the Council's decision. We will work hard to show we are worthy of this trust." The head counselor's tentacles waved gently. "Would you like to address the Council, Ambassador?" Daniel nodded and turned to face the gathered representatives. "Humanity fought not just for ourselves, but for principles we believe must be universal," he said, his voice clear and strong. "That the rights of all thinking beings are important, no matter how advanced they are. That having powerful technology means nothing if you use it to hurt others, and that wrong actions must be challenged, no matter who commits them." He paused, looking around at the many different aliens watching him. The council chamber, once ruled by old alliances and ancient customs, had changed. Younger races now had more voice. The Vesperi, stripped of their military power and under close watch, had begun to change their ways under a new government. "We thank our allies who stood with us," Daniel continued. "And we look forward to working with all peaceful species to build a better galaxy." As Daniel left the chamber after the ceremony, Lisa joined him in the hallway. "Did you ever think our declaration of war would end up bringing the most peaceful change in Council history?" she asked. Daniel smiled tiredly. "Sometimes the threat of war can prevent a worse conflict, but only when those involved care about more than just power." He looked out at the busy station, where hundreds of different species moved about their business. The real victory isn't what we gained, but what we changed. Across the galaxy, in former Vesperi research facilities, the victims of experiments were healing. Human doctors worked side by side with medical teams from 30 different worlds. Dr. Grant Wilson, who had been part of the first rescue mission, had established the Interspecies Trauma Recovery Center, where beings from all races could find help. On the Jupiter colonies, now rebuilt after the Vesperi attack, Commander Paul Hudson watched new ships dock at the station. Some were human, but others belonged to their new allies. Earth was no longer alone in the galaxy. Admiral Nicole Harrison had been promoted to lead the new Joint Human-Alien Defense Force. Her experience fighting the Vesperi had earned her the respect of even the oldest spacefaring races. And across Earth, people looked up at the stars with new understanding. The galaxy was bigger, more complex, and sometimes more dangerous than they had imagined. But humanity had found its place among the stars not through conquest or fear, but by standing up for what was right, even when it seemed impossible. As Daniel prepared to return to Earth, he thought about how much had changed because of one desperate decision to declare a war they never intended to fight. Sometimes, the greatest victories came from the most unlikely strategies. And sometimes, the newest voices had the most important things to say.